the roar of engines fueled by hatred and the earth trembling beneath steel chains. That's the image many of us have of World War II, a stage for the armored titans that defined modern warfare. We immediately think of the German Tigers, the sleek Panthers, perhaps the robust Soviet T-34s. Fearsome war machines, designed to dominate and destroy. But what if I told you that a tank's true strength was never just the thickness of its armor or the caliber of its gun? What if the story of one of the most prolific and, ironically, most underrated tanks of the war was actually the story of men who, against all odds, transformed a machine considered weak into an unforgettable symbol of resistance and heroism? Today, we're going to unearth the saga of the M4 Sherman. Not just the machine itself, but the steely soul and courage that pulsed within it, its crew. We'll delve into the depths of the combat experience, the sweat and tension of operating a Sherman against often superior adversaries, and how, through sheer ingenuity, bravery, and an unbreakable bond, a crew elevated their tin duck, as it was pejoratively called, to legendary status. This is the story of how human resilience redefined what it means to be an armored war hero. When the M4 Sherman entered service in 1942, it represented the pinnacle of American industrial capability. It was designed to be the workhorse of the U.S. Army, a robust, reliable, and above all, mass-produced machine. The philosophy behind the Sherman was not to create the most powerful tank in the world, but rather a good enough tank, in large numbers, that could be easily maintained and operated on the battlefield. General George S. Patton, an armor enthusiast, once said, "I'd rather have an army of Shermans than a handful of Tigers." The logic was simple. Quantity has its own quality. At the start of the war, the Sherman was indeed a formidable opponent. Its 75mm M3 gun was effective against most German panzers of the time, such as the Panzer III and early versions of the Panzer IV. Its speed, mobility, and the innovative vertical stabilization of the gun allowed it to fire with reasonable accuracy while moving, a significant tactical advantage. The five-man crew had relatively comfortable space, and the large turret provided an excellent field of vision for the commander. It was a well-balanced machine, with a Ford GAA radial gasoline engine that, although a bit thirsty, was reliable and relatively easy to maintain. However, as the war progressed and the Allies encountered the terrifying new German tanks, the Tiger I and, later, the Panther, perceptions of the Sherman began to change drastically. The Tiger I, with its impenetrable armor and its 88mm gun capable of piercing anything the Allies possessed at long range, quickly gained a mythical reputation. The Panther, with its sloped frontal armor and its high-velocity, long-barreled 75mm gun, was almost as lethal. Suddenly, the Sherman, with its vertical armor and its 75mm gun that could barely scratch the frontal armor of these new monsters, seemed painfully inadequate. Accounts of early encounters were brutal. Sherman crews saw their projectiles ricochet harmlessly off Tigers and Panthers, while a single enemy shot turned their tank into a funeral pyre. The nickname Ronson, a reference to a lighter that lights the first time every time, was a stark reminder of the Sherman's vulnerability to ignition. This was partly due to how ammunition was stored in the sides of the tank, vulnerable to penetration. Although later variants with wet stowage, ammunition stored in compartments filled with water or antifreeze fluid, drastically improved safety, the reputation for fragility was already firmly established. German technological superiority in heavy tanks created a significant psychological imbalance. Imagine being a Sherman crew member, knowing you're driving a target, that an enemy could destroy it from a safe distance, while you need to get dangerously close to have a chance of penetration, and even then, the chance was slim. This was the reality for thousands of young Americans and Allied soldiers. The external and often internal perception was that the Sherman was a weak tank. It wasn't the most heavily armored, it wasn't the most powerful, and in a direct firefight, it was at a clear disadvantage. But it is precisely here that the narrative begins to deviate from what the technical manuals might suggest. What the raw data failed to capture was the indomitable spirit of the crews. They knew the limitations of their machine, but refused to be defined by them. Instead, they adapted. They improvised. They used the Sherman's mobility to flank, its speed to escape, and its reliability to stay in the fight when other tanks failed. They learned to target the weak points of the Tigers and Panthers, the sides, the rear, the hatches, the turret ring. They used infantry to identify threats and air support to neutralize heavier armor. Tank warfare was not just a matter of specifications. It was a matter of tactics, training, and above all, courage. To understand the true strength of the Sherman, we need to look at the men inside it. A tank crew wasn't just a group of individuals. It was an organic unit, a brain, muscles, and nerves operating a complex machine under extreme conditions. Life inside a Sherman was a hell of noise, heat, smoke, and confinement. The smell of burnt gunpowder, diesel, and sweat permeated the air. Every movement of the tank was felt by everyone. Every impact was a blow to the body and soul. The training to become a tank crewman was rigorous and exhausting. It wasn't enough to know how to shoot or drive. You had to understand the machine, anticipate your comrades' actions, and react in fractions of a second. Everyone's life depended on their competence and synchronization. At the heart of the crew was the commander. Usually a sergeant, he was the eyes, ears, and brains of the tank. His head was often exposed through the hatch for better observation, making him a prime target. He coordinated the crew's actions, identified threats, selected targets, and made life-or-death decisions under fire. His ability to remain calm under pressure, to read the terrain, to understand enemy intentions, and to communicate clear and concise orders was key to survival and success. He was the leader, the strategist, and often the mentor of his small steel family. The gunner was the tank's lethal precision. Responsible for operating the main gun, he needed impeccable aim, a deep understanding of ballistics, and the ability to engage moving targets with precision, often amidst the turbulence of the tank itself. He adjusted the sights, estimated the distance, and fired under the sergeant's command. The pressure on the gunner was immense. A missed shot could mean the difference between life and death for the entire crew. The ammunition handler, often the youngest and physically strongest member of the crew, was the rhythm of the battle. His job was to load the main gun with the correct ammunition in the shortest time possible. In intense combat, he might have to load a 75mm shell weighing around 6.8 kilograms every 5 seconds. He was also responsible for ensuring ammunition was ready and accessible, and often helped identify targets or observe the battlefield. His speed and efficiency were crucial to maintaining a steady and decisive rate of fire. The driver was the master of mobility. Seated in the front left, he controlled the tank's movement, navigating treacherous terrain, avoiding obstacles, and maneuvering to present the strongest armor to the enemy or to seek cover. He needed an intuitive understanding of the terrain and the ability to react quickly. In combat, the crew's lives depended on his ability to position the tank to maximize the chances of survival and effective engagement. The Sherman's ability to turn quickly or use its speed was entirely dependent on the driver's skill. Finally, the co-driver/gunner of the bow machine gun. Seated in the front right, he operated the .30 caliber bow machine gun, providing suppressive fire against enemy infantry. He also acted as an additional observer, alerting the commander to flank or rear threats, and often assisted with minor maintenance and repairs. It was a position that demanded constant attention and an understanding of the overall tactical situation. These 5 men, together, formed a symbiosis. They were forced to entrust their lives to each other in a way that few civilians could comprehend. Communication was essential, often done through a noisy intercom or by hand signals and touches amidst the chaos. They developed a kind of camaraderie that transcended friendship, a bond forged in the heat of combat and the shared certainty that they would only survive if they worked as an indivisible whole. It was this synergy, this resilience, and this human innovation that truly transformed the Sherman from a weak tank into a machine capable of extraordinary feats. And it was precisely this synergy that manifested itself spectacularly on a fateful day in the summer of 1944, in the dense and claustrophobic landscapes of the Normandy bocage. Operation Cobra was in full swing. The Allied advance was finally breaking the hedgerow stalemate, but the cost was high. Every meter of ground was being fiercely contested. Our story focuses on the crew of the Phantom Avenger, an M4A3 Sherman of the U.S. 3rd Armored Division. Sergeant Frank Miller, a veteran of previous campaigns, commanded the tank. His face was a canvas of worry and determination, his ever-alert eyes scanning the horizon. The gunner, Corporal Thomas Jensen, had nerves of steel and an aim that seemed instinctive. The loader, Private First Class Miguel Ramirez, was a wellspring of energy, his body strong and agile, always ready for the next projectile. At the wheel was the burly and calm Private Robert Evans, whose precise control of the Sherman was legendary in the company. And completing the team was the co-driver and gunner of the bow machine gun, Private David Johnson, a young observer with a talent for detecting the slightest enemy movements. Their mission that day was crucial, to advance along a narrow, winding secondary road, flanked by impenetrable hedges, to outflank a German position that was holding back the advance of an infantry regiment. Intelligence indicated that the area was defended by infantry with anti-tank weapons and perhaps some light armor. But rumors of Panthers in the area were persistent and worrying. The journey began under a heavy, gray sky, typical of Normandy. The Phantom Avenger led a small platoon of 3 Shermans. The roar of the Ford GAA engine, a constant and familiar rumble, filled the tank's interior. Miller, his head sticking out of the hatch, was constantly scanning the hedges. "Evans, slow down here. These bocages are an invitation to ambushes." They advanced for almost an hour, with Johnson firing short bursts from the bow machine gun at any suspicious movement in the hedgerows. Suddenly, a flash ahead. A dry, deafening crack. A Panzerschreck projectile struck the side armor of the following Sherman, the Thunderbolt. An explosion of black smoke and a cry of pain over the radio. "Contact! Panzerschreck, right side of the road." Johnson, suppressive fire. Miller yelled, pulling his head inside. "Evans, speed up. We have to get through or find cover." Evans floored it. The Sherman squealed, accelerating, its chains shredding the earth and mud. Jensen, with Ramirez feeding him, fired a round of high explosive, in the general direction of the flash, hoping to suppress the shooter. The Phantom Avenger advanced, leaving the smoking Thunderbolt behind. They managed to advance a few meters before Miller spotted a group of German infantry trying to set up another anti-tank gun. "Jensen, infantry, 11 o'clock, near that fallen tree." The 75mm cannon roared, and the projectile exploded with a bang in the German position, scattering the soldiers. But the road was opening onto a small field, and Miller felt a chill down his spine. It was a perfect spot for an armored ambush. "Evans, turn right. Let's get cover behind that barn." As Evans maneuvered the Sherman to the relative safety of the stone barn, a new sound filled the air, deeper, more menacing than anything they had heard before. A deafening roar. A massive impact struck the turret of the Phantom Avenger with the force of Thor's hammer. The tank rattled violently, throwing the crew to the sides. A metallic ricochet sound echoed, but the impact was real. "What the hell was that?" Ramirez gasped, struggling to hold on. "Panther. 9 o'clock. In that distant line of trees." Miller shouted, his voice tense but firm. His eyes had just caught sight of the unmistakable silhouette of the German tank, its long cannon pointed directly at them. The projectile had struck the turret's mantlet, a reinforced area, and ricocheted, but the force had been tremendous. "Evans, total reverse. Jensen, AP. Ramirez, we're going to need all the APs we've got." Panther fired again. This time, the projectile struck the Sherman's rear side plate. It didn't penetrate fully, but the damage was enough to break one of the track belts. The Phantom Avenger squealed, its engine roaring uselessly as Evans tried to reverse. The tank was immobilized. A tense and terrifying silence fell inside the Sherman, broken only by the sputtering engine and the men's heavy breathing. They were trapped, exposed, and facing a superior predator. "Miller, we're stuck. The right conveyor belt is broken." Evans shouted, despair beginning to seep into his voice. The Panther, sensing the blood, began to advance slowly, its cannon rotating to align for a fatal blow. "No. Don't panic. Jensen, smoke. Fire a round of smoke in front of them. Ramirez, AP on the cannon. Johnson, machine gun on the infantry if they advance." Miller commanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Jensen, his hands trembling slightly, loaded a round of smoke and fired. A dense, white cloud began to spread across the field, obscuring the Panther's vision. It was a temporary relief, a veil of uncertainty that bought them a few precious seconds. "Evans, try to turn the tank around. Show them the front as much as possible. Even if the tracks are broken, we have to try to turn." Evans, with renewed determination, began to strain the engine, attempting to turn the Sherman using only the left track and differential drive. The tank trembled and dragged, managing to turn a few degrees, presenting a slightly smaller profile to the enemy. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. "Miller, what do we do? Our 75mm isn't going to penetrate the front of that monster," Jensen asked, the frustration evident in his voice. Miller watched through the periscope vision, his mind racing. The smoke was beginning to dissipate. The panther was closer now, perhaps 400 meters away. He saw a small depression in the ground, almost a furrow, leading to a deeper ditch on the side of the field. It was a risky gamble. "Evans, do you see that ditch to our right, near that bush? Get ready to turn the tank into it. I know it's crazy, but it might give us cover and a firing angle." Evans hesitated for a moment. Throwing a 30-ton tank into a ditch was extremely dangerous. They could roll over, or the tank could get even more stuck. But he trusted Miller. "Understood, Sergeant." The Panther fired again. The projectile whistled over their tank, striking the stone barn behind with a thunderous force, shattering the masonry. They were out of time. "Now, Evans! All the power! Let's go to the grave!" Evans engaged the gear and forced the Sherman to the right. The tank squealed and tilted dangerously, the crew screaming and clinging on as the Phantom Avenger fell into the ditch with a deafening thud. For a second, they feared the tank would roll over. But Sherman, despite all the abuse, held on. It was tilted, the broken track even more compromised, but it was there, partially hidden, with the turret still functional. The incline was steep, and the Panther's view was limited. But Miller had an idea. "Jensen, can you see the side of that Panther if I rotate the turret slightly to the left?" Jensen adjusted his vision, taking a deep breath. "Yes, Sergeant. It's a tight angle, but I can see the side of the turret and maybe the lower hull plate." "Ramirez, AP. Charge fast. Jensen, aim at the base of the turret where it meets the hull, or at the lower side plate. It's our only chance." The Pantera, now about 200 meters away, was maneuvering to get a clear view of the immobilized Sherman. Its gunners were probably preparing for a precise shot. "Light it up when you're ready, Jensen. It's now or never." The silence inside the tank was almost palpable, broken only by Ramirez's panting breath as he loaded the next AP round. Jensen, sweat dripping down his face, adjusted his sights, compensating for the Sherman's tilt. He knew this shot had to be perfect. "Ready, Sergeant. Fire!" The 75mm cannon fired with a furious roar. The projectile cut through the air, a straight line of steel and hatred. Time seemed to slow down. The impact was audible, a clang, unlike the previous ricochets. A small spark, and then a pale white smoke began to leak from the side of the Panther, near the base of the turret. "Correct. Miller, we got it right!" Jensen shouted, his voice choked with adrenaline and shock. The smoke from the Panther grew thicker and darker, and then flames erupted from the turret and engine compartment. The German tank stopped abruptly, its cannon pointing to the sky in a gesture of surrender. The German crew began to hurriedly exit, some wounded, others throwing themselves to the ground for cover. A stunned silence filled the interior of the Phantom Avenger. The crew was exhausted, trembling, but alive. They had done the impossible. A Sherman with its 75mm cannon had knocked out a Panther. It wasn't a stroke of luck, it was a stroke of mastery, tactics, and pure bravery. "Miller, we did it," Evans murmured, his voice hoarse. "Yes, Evans. We did it," Miller replied, a smile of relief and pride spreading across his soot-stained face. "Good job, everyone. Good job." Within minutes, the radio crackled with the platoon commander's voice, warning that reinforcements were on their way and that the infantry had managed to advance, taking advantage of the confusion created by Panther's defeat. The crucial crossroads was now within reach. The story of the Phantom Avenger and his crew is one that has been repeated in countless variations throughout the war. It wasn't brute force or technical superiority that defined victory that day, but the adaptability, courage, and ability of a crew to extract every drop of potential from their machine. They transformed a tank that many considered weak into an instrument of triumph, not through its specifications, but through the human spirit that operated it. The M4 Sherman was a phenomenal tank in its reliability, ease of maintenance, and, crucially, its ability to be produced in overwhelming numbers. But its true strength, the one that elevated it above mere engineering, lay in the crews who piloted it. These men, the Millers, the Jensens, the Ramirezes, the Evans, and the Johnsons, were the true brains and brawn behind the steel. They learned to compensate for the Sherman's shortcomings with clever tactics, using speed to flank, mobility to position themselves on advantageous terrain, and coordination to overcome heavier adversaries. They knew that, in a head-on duel with a tiger or a panther, their chances were slim. But war wasn't a series of single duels. It was a chaotic mix of movement, ambushes, infantry support, and surprise. And under those conditions, the Sherman, in the hands of an experienced and brave crew, could be deadly. The use of smoke, prioritizing weak points in enemy armor, instant communication between crew members, all of this transformed the Sherman from a target into a cunning predator. The resilience of these crews is a testament to the human spirit in times of war. They faced fear, uncertainty, and imminent death every day. But they also built unbreakable bonds, learned to trust their comrades absolutely, and ultimately demonstrated that true power in combat lies not only in the most advanced machines, but in those who operate them. The M4 Sherman, often ridiculed for its vulnerability compared to its German counterparts, was, in fact, an unforgettable hero of World War II. Not a hero of impenetrable armor or crushing cannon, but a hero of persistence, of numbers, of adaptability, and, above all, a hero who embodied the courage and ingenuity of the crews who drove it to victory. They took a machine with its flaws and transformed it, through their own acts of bravery, into a legend, proving that the true strength of a tank lies in the soul of its occupants. If you were thrilled by the story of the Phantom Avenger and his crew, and want to delve deeper into the armored vehicle chronicles of World War II, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Your passion for history is what drives us to continue telling these incredible stories. Until next time.